I'm Faz Shakir.
I'm Amanda Litman, and this is Battleground. I am still flying solo this week because Faz is spending time with his very cute new baby. Our guest this week is Jessica Huseman. She is the Editorial Director of Votebeat. Jessica Huseman, Editorial Director for Votebeat. I am so glad to have you on Battleground today.
I am really excited to be here.
I want to start with a thread that you wrote on Twitter. Love to talk about the tweets. In which you were sharing a video that Harris County Judge Lena Hidalgo, who is a Run for Something alum, I know her quite well, posted about the bill that is going through the Texas State Legislature right now. And you said something that really stood out to me in that it makes you very mad when people say that voting is as American as apple pie. Can you explain why that phrase pisses you off?
Because the act of voting is inherently not a founding American principle. It has become one. But I think that what is far more American than actually voting is fighting to be able to do so. I think that saying things like voting is as American as apple pie makes it seem as if this was like a God-given right we all had as America formed from the primordial ooze, and we all just vote and everything is great. In fact, like, this country was founded on the principle that only men of measurable wealth who were white could vote, right? Like, the property owner thing is not really true. We've sort of missed in this arc of history that even at the beginning of the country, most white men couldn't vote, right? Like, it is not true that voting is an American principle. It is something that we have created for ourselves through continued advocacy and continued violence and continued struggle over time. And so that is American. There is no constitutional right to vote, which is why states can ban people from doing it, right? That's why they can ban felons from voting. That's why they can ban, people with mental disabilities from voting if they choose to, or lower the voting age to 16 or raise it to whatever. I mean, like, there are very few standards set by the federal government for how voting must happen. And so to say that it is a right makes it seem as if there is some law somewhere in our founding documents that says everyone needs to vote, and it doesn't. And all of the confusion that we have now with the lack of standardization across states, the lack of consistent enforcement of voting laws, the lack of even a common definition of voter fraud or election fraud is because there is no inherent voting right in America. We have decided it's a democracy, but that word was actually used by the founders with some level of derision when the country was founded. And it was never intended to serve the purpose that it serves now. And so I think that we need to recognize that as we talk about this stuff.
You say that landowners was not the original intention for voting. I'd always understood that to be the case. That's actually surprising to me. Can you demystify that a little bit?
I can. So the Constitution says nothing about, like, white landowning males, right? The Constitution allowed every state to decide for themselves who the electorate was, and that varied widely from state to state. So in states where people did own homes, and that was a way to measure wealth, that was often the case, that property owning men could vote, like white men could vote. But in densely urban areas, like, for example, New York City, there are, and still today, very wealthy people who run businesses that have a lot of influence on society that may never own a home. And that's true today. That was true in 1776. Densely populated urban areas tend to cater to renters. And so the laws had to accommodate that. So instead of landowning, it was you had to own a certain number of items, or instead of property, you could own a business, or maybe instead of a business or property, because you're simply the son of a wealthy child, you get grandfathered in because your father could vote, right? Like, there are lots of different ways that states chose to write that path through history. I think that America has mythologized this struggle for voting rights in this way that is ahistorical and I don't think helps give context to the moment. So white people assume, oh, well, we've always been able to vote. So like, this isn't our struggle. It is. Like, there was a really long time where white women couldn't vote and where most white men could not vote because they didn't own property, right? Like, most of the country was not wealthy property owners. And I think that they ignore that this struggle is their struggle too, and it always has been.
You're a former history teacher. Can you give us the Crib Notes version of like the major points in which voting rights were won or lost in the last, 250 years of American history?
I mean, so it's a bit of an ebb and a flow. So at the beginning of our country, like new baby country, voting looked much different, right? It usually happened by voice. It usually happened in bars. There was no paper. Everybody just said who they were voting for, and then they all got really drunk, and they were probably drunk when they were voting, and that was elections. There was like no election security whatsoever. As the population grew, right, and more people started qualifying to vote, and more states started being added to the union, states had total authority over who they allowed the makeup of the electorate to be. But you can see states as they build up, as they pull their constitutions into being, they're setting the terms of their electorate. And so by mid 1800s, everybody has their own state constitutions. Everyone can vote in very different ways. Then the Civil War comes. We get the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments as a result of that. And, states adopt these with varying amounts of vigor and commitment. Then we get into the Jim Crow South and Reconstruction and the Civil Rights era. And so, it's a turbulent history. And what makes me upset about the characterization of like voting is as American as apple pie. If we were voting as the founders intended,
like, we wouldn't be voting.
We wouldn't be voting. You can go back and read the Federalist Papers, and you can go back and read the writings of James Madison specifically, who people hold up as like the inventor of democracy, right? But he straight up says, like, if we enfranchise more than the people who are enfranchised now, this country will end. Like, that is how severe he thought expanding the electorate would be. And now we're like, voting is American. Well, that's false, like historically false.
The people empowered control the terms of the following elections. And that's what we're seeing now, especially with the Republican Party, who have won control of a majority of state legislatures. They have a number of governorships. Why are Republicans setting up this way and such that they want to restrict who can show up at the polls?
I mean, I think that obviously they're just playing to a party of one. Like, I don't think, for example, that the elections bill in Texas would be what it is, or perhaps even exist, if Greg Abbott, the governor, was not so worried about getting Trump's endorsement. Texas is interesting because our bill is so stupid. Like, they're
Yeah, let's talk about it. What makes it so particularly stupid?
Our laws were already so restrictive that they're just fine-tuning the edges in ways that don't make any sense and that election administrators can't figure out how to enforce because they're just sort of like making things that already existed weirder rather than creating something new or radically changing something that already existed. There are literal problems in this bill, like, for example, a provision that like would require counties to buy voting machines that are currently not being made.
And they're doing this bill because of Trump and because of the need to sort of like, capitulate to the big lie of, if this election was fraudulent or stolen, certainly we must do something in rebuttal. But the reason the laws in Texas are so restrictive to begin with is because of a decades-long effort by, in particular, the Republican Party to limit the number of voters who they think would otherwise be Democrats' ability to show up at the polls, which in particular has meant young people, communities of color, new Americans. They are making an assumption here that when more people vote, Democrats win.
And I think it's a dangerous one to make.
Yeah, totally dangerous.
It's like flatly dangerous for democracy to... And then also I think that this will eventually bite them in the ass. And here's why I think that. Because I think that they lost Georgia because they disenfranchised their own voters. There is no reason There is just no reason. The polls did not suggest it. The campaigns did not suggest it, that both of the Senate seats in Georgia should be held by Democrats right now. People in Georgia know that Trump completely eliminated any confidence in the vote-by-mail system. And so his voters chose not to do that. And Republicans are starting to say that to me, sort of like the ones that are a little bit more moderate are like, I don't know what to do. They are going way too far. We're eventually going to disenfranchise our own voters, like through misinformation. But what do I do right now? They're like, I'm the only sane person in my party. If I roast myself publicly and get all of these crazies riled up and get voted out, then I really can't do anything. And so I don't know what the right answer is for them. I don't know what their constituents really expect of them. And I guess we'll see what happens. Nothing good, I assume.
Thanks for watching. You can get the full episode of Battleground on The Recount streaming daily or listen to it wherever you get your podcasts.